So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. We are still in Surah Nisa. And of course, yesterday we didn't actually have our tafsir class yesterday because my son actually got an allergy reaction. But alhamdulillah, everything was actually fine. Alhamdulillah, and we are back. And while I was actually doing my, my review on what we were doing in tafsir, I thought that we missed out on certain points in our tafsir, which I thought it would be good to actually go back to them. And I was going over tafsir al-Qurtubi, and I thought, some of the points would be good to actually mention that I didn't actually mention in class. Unfortunately, I did actually highlight them, but then I guess the highlight wasn't saved. But we're still going to go over them, inshallah. And I forgot to mention, I don't know if I did or not, but I probably did. In the ayah, إن الله يأمركم أن تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها وإذا حكمتم بين الناس أن تحكموا بالعدل. So basically, let's see the ayah, where is that? This ayah right there, right here. So إن الله يأمركم أن تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها. And as I was going to Tafsir al-Qurtubi, I did actually notice that there was an opinion that I forgot to mention, which is the opinion that for the keys for the Kaaba. So let me just explain what happened. So for the keys for the Kaaba, there are these keys that open the actual Kaaba. The Mecca is the city, but the Kaaba is the actual black cube. Okay, that's the Kaaba. All right. So Uthman ibn Talha Uthman ibn Talha or Uthman ibn Abi Talha. So he was from Bani Abd in 8th year Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ, of course, conquers or opens Mecca. And of course, it becomes under Muslim rule at the time. And Uthman ibn Abi Talha had the keys for the Kaaba. So Ali ibn Abi Talib, okay, and the Abbas, they basically go and take the keys from him because right now, being, of course, the official authority, they take the keys from him. That's when he actually comes to the Prophet ﷺ and complains that we've had these keys for centuries, and they came over and they took the keys from me. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ, of course, well, first the Prophet ﷺ enters the Kaaba, basically breaks all the different idols that were in there, and the ayah was revealed when he had actually come to complain to the Prophet ﷺ about Ali ibn Abi Talib and even Al-Abbas taking the keys. And that's when, right there, إن الله يأمركم أن تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders you to give the trusts or the whatever they were trusted with, to give it back to their owners. And then, of course, وإذا حكمتم بين الناس أن تحكموا بالعدل. And if you had you ruled on people, that you would rule in justice. Now, I also forgot to mention, of course, when we look at these ayat, remember there is the general rule. The general rule is that although this ayah was revealed for a particular circumstance, but al-ibra bi'umum al-lafzi la bikhusus al-sabab. Let me write that down because this is really important. Many times people are really confused. Does that mean this shouldn't include our life today? So let me write that down. It's basically al-ibra bi'umum al-lafzi la bikhusus al-sabab. What does that mean? So al-ibra bi'umum al-lafzi la bikhusus al-sabab, here we go. So this actually means the general rule on matters, or the text themselves is basically in the generalization of the statement and not necessarily in the particular circumstance that it was revealed in. And therefore, we can't necessarily say in Allah amurkum an tu'addu al-amanati ila ahliha, well, that means that doesn't include us. Or let's say the ayah is talking about women wearing hijab and say, well, this doesn't include us. Or let's say the ayah was revealed in a certain circumstance and say, well, that was revealed for that particular circumstance and therefore doesn't include us. Well, this right here, العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب, is basically explaining this piece of it, in where the generalization of the statement would basically include all the scenarios that are alike. In other words, there's another word for it. It's called al-ashbah wal-nadha'ir. What is al-ashbah wal-nadha'ir? So basically, when you look at the circumstances, any circumstance that is similar, the word al-ashbah is basically a plural of shabah, and the nadha'ir is a plural of nadhir. So al-ashbah wal-nadha'ir, the plural for these is basically al-ashbah, to meaning the similarities and the comparisons. So the things that are similar to the same circumstances or similar circumstances would actually take similar rulings. All right, similar circumstances would take similar rulings. And in fact, of course, the paradigms of different circumstances would take the same paradigm in terms of the consequence and the eventual basically leading rule on it, or of course the rule that basically is derived for this particular circumstance. Now that's al-ashbah wal-nadha'ir is a really important uh, I would say, title for a number of different books that would basically be books of usul or principles of fiqh to help us recognize, derive the rulings based on the similar circumstances and similar situations, and of course, how they're related to one another. So in this area, so just wanted to go back to that one. And as, like I said, I was going over the ayat that I was covering, just forgot to mention, I guess I forgot to mention that story right there. Then another opinion basically said, well, yes, although it was actually speaking about as al-amana in terms of the keys at that moment, but it is inclusive. And here you could see some scholars actually said that this actually includes al-amana fi kulli shay. It's basically an amana in all matters. Why? Because remember, when you look at al-amanat, you look at that al, remember the al could be an inclusive al-amanat to mean all the different types of amana, or all the different types of trusts, or it can be a particular al, which is al-istighraqiyya or al-ahdiyya. Al-istighraqiyya would mean the inclusive al, and al-ahdiyya would actually mean the particular al. It's a particular thing that it basically is referring to. But of course, to these scholars, and from them are basically Sahaba, al-Bara ibn Azib, Ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, Ubay ibn Ka'b, they all said that this was basically more of an inclusive al to basically include the general amana in whatever you practice, whether you're practicing wudu, salah, zakah, or of course washing from janaba, siyam, or even when we're talking about weighing merchandise, or even the trusts or the loans that somebody might actually have with you. At the end of the day, they're basically included within a trust, and therefore, of course, basically wanting to say any type of an amana. All right. Just wanted to go over a couple points. I'm just going over it. And let's see, this hadith, I don't know if I had said it or not. So Ubay ibn Ka'b had narrated that he had heard the Prophet ﷺ actually say, Addil amanata ila man tamanak wa la takhun man khanak. Give the amana to whoever had trusted you with it, and don't betray those that had betrayed you. Now, this is important to mention because oftentimes we might give ourselves the justification to act in the same, or basically what we would consider as bil mithl. In other words, as they would deal with me, I would deal with them, and acting, of course, in retaliation to a certain behavior that they had committed. So according to the Prophet, be careful from giving yourself the justification that, well, they did this to me, therefore it is fair enough to retaliate in the same way, in the same response, in the same, I guess, area or direction of their betrayal. According to this hadith, be careful from this narrative. And in fact, the hadith was saying, Addil amana, give the amana to whoever trusts you with it, and do not betray those that had betrayed you. In other words, even if they do betray you, that doesn't give you the justification to act in a similar manner. Why? Well, that's because you, as a person of taqwa, would actually act in taqwa, and therefore you would abide by the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even when others are not. Let's look at this hadith. Let's see, this hadith, أخرجه الدارقطني, let's see right there. So basically said there's majhul, batil la a'rifu, and of course he said all of it is da'if. Hold on. So look at this one. And in الشافعي he said هذا الحديث ليس بثابت عند أهل العلم منكم ولو كان ثابتا لم يكن فيه حجة علينا إذ دلت السنة وإجماع كثير من أهل العلم على أن يأخذ الرجل حقه لنفسه سرا من الذي هو عليه فقد دل أن ذلك ليس بخيانة. الخيانة أخذ ما لا يحل أخذه. Okay, الشافعي objects, and what he says is that, well, he says this hadith is not proven to be authentic, and he said what we would know is that in Sunnah, and even what you unanimously would be agreed upon between Ahl al-Ilm, or between the scholars, is that a person, if they basically had their rights taken away, in where you could actually take your right away, even if, of course, the person was actually unaware that you had taken your right. In other words, if you had known that this iPhone was stolen from you, and you know that that is your iPhone, that you could actually go take it, even if the person basically denied taking it from you. But according to Shafi, if you know for 100% that this is your phone, and they basically betrayed you and took your phone away from you, as an example, hypothetically speaking, he didn't say phone, but yeah. So basically he was saying that you can actually take your rights even in secret. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to mention that I didn't mention about this ayah is that al-bayyinatu ala al-mudda'i. So everybody is basically supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And if anybody claims that any person or anybody is guilty of something, then they're the ones that they have to prove that person's guilt, and not to ask the innocent person to prove their innocence. So let's say I accuse Noura of taking my phone. I would have to prove that this is my phone, and I would have to prove that she is guilty, and not to ask Noura to prove that she is innocent. So basically, the person that is accusing others of being guilty is basically the one asked to prove and bring about the evidence. So you don't have to think about what evidence do I need to prepare in order to prove my innocence. The other person is the one that's supposed to prove the guilt for the other person. Now, the other thing is al-yaminu ala man ankar, that a person, let's say, so who accused the other? Okay, I accused Noura of taking my phone, and she accused me. I forgot what scenario I put forward, but al-yaminu ala man ankar, the person that, let's say Noura was not, I wasn't capable of proving that Noura took my phone. Okay. In that situation, I can ask Noura, can you make a yamin? What is a yamin? Yamin basically is an oath. I would ask Noura to make an oath that this phone is not my phone. So Noura, I would ask you to say, Wallahi, this is not your phone. So in that situation, I can ask her to make the yamin. Making the yamin, what does that actually mean, and what does it entail? So it basically means you put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as your witness. So yeah, fair enough. I can make the yamin, Noura can say, and I can actually fast 3 days, or probably just feed 10 needy people. Yeah, it would definitely cost me a lot less than an iPhone 15, even though my phone is not iPhone 15, but okay, it would cost me less. So if I were to feed 10 people, I'll feed 10 people. It cost me $150, probably $200. It's better than paying $500 or actually $700 for an iPhone 15. So in that situation, she would consider it, well, does that mean that removes the guilt off of me? There we go. No, it does not. Why? Because, pay attention to this one. Il-Yamin is not in situations of the Yamin al-Ghamus. What is Yamin al-Ghamus? Yamin is three kinds. There is the first kind. Let me write it down, okay? There's the first kind. So when we're speaking about bayna, there is the first kind, which is Yamin al-Laghu. What does that mean? Yamin al-Laghu is a common thing that, for example, Somalis would do whenever they would be talking. You, even though I don't understand Somali, but I could hear the aunties basically wallahi, 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 and you don't know what on earth she's saying wallahi for, but you could definitely know, even though I don't speak the language, but you could definitely see that it was yamin lahu, that she wasn't really being in a serious manner taking that wallahi seriously. It was more of lahu. So she was basically, I guess, just using it as part of the sentence and not necessarily something that takes us to the second kind, which is yamin munaqida. Yamin munaqida actually means you really wanted to make that oath for a serious manner to prove one particular thing. That's a yamin munaqida. So yamin munaqida, and where I would say, wallahi, I'm going to, doesn't have to be to do something, but wallahi, I'm going to do this and this, or wallahi, I said this. Somebody asks you, hey, did you put the pencils here? Wallahi, I did, for example. But there's the other kind, which is called yamin al-ghamus, okay? The yamin that basically relates to people's rights is yamin al-ghamus. So for yamin munaqida, the second type, you can actually make if, let's say, you said, wallahi, I'm not going to visit my sister because the other day she disrespected me, for example. Okay, you make this yamin, but then later on you notice that maybe I shouldn't have made this yamin. Maybe I just overreacted. Maybe I was too emotional at that time. There's probably a better way to do it. But then you're like, but I made a yamin. I swore by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I would not visit my sister. But then she gets sick. In that situation, the Prophet ﷺ actually says, من حلف على يمينه فرأى غيرها خيرا منها فليأتي الذي هو خير فليكفر عن يمينه. Whoever makes a yamin, whoever makes this oath, and finds that something else is a better alternative than sticking to the yamin, well, then don't make your yamin / your oath to be an obstacle from you and doing what is righteous. You regret doing that yamin, so when that, and you recognize that breaking your yamin would actually be a better thing to do, then in that situation, break your yamin and basically pay the expiation for that yamin or the kafara. So what is that kafara? Basically to free a slave. Well, we don't have any slaves, alhamdulillah, now, so giving food for 10 needy people, or the second option is basically clothing 10 needy people. Okay, so 10 needy people. And you would not go for the alternative to this unless you couldn't afford to feed 10 people or 10 needy people, or afford to probably give clothing for 10 needy people. And in that situation, if you couldn't afford it, that's when you can fast for 3 days. But I am diabetic and I can't fast for 3 days. In that situation, we'll basically tell you, well, you got to be really careful with what you would make as an oath and make istighfar. So this is idea. Yamin al-ghamus is not included in this. Yamin al-ghamus relates to people's rights. So when it relates to people's rights, you would basically have to go to the people and compensate them and ask them for forgiveness. So you cannot consider Yamin al-Ghamus as, well, it's a cheaper way, it's a business. I'll go and feed 10 people. It's going to cost me $150, $200, and I'll just steal an iPhone that is more expensive than that and get away with it. No, you don't get away with it. So Yamin al-Ghamus is different. That actually means you would have to go and ask the person for forgiveness, and you cannot basically go and make business with people's rights. All right. Now, إذا حكمتم بين الناس أن تحكموا بالعدل, forgot to mention that the discourse here, who is it directed at? And we mentioned last time that it was really, the hakamtum bain nas, so if you had ruled upon people, that you would rule in justice. And then certain scholars had actually said, well, this is not for all people, because in general, people are not supposed to be in a position to rule on people. And certain scholars had considered that this discourse is really directed at those that are in a position of governance, in a position of ruling, and therefore, basically, yes, whoever is in that position, whether you're a teacher or whether you are probably a police officer or a judge or whatever it is, in that situation, that would include you as well. So I just wanted to mention that one. There is another thing, which is the other area that comes after it. I'm just laying out the points that I had forgot to mention before. So, يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. I don't know if I had mentioned the part about أولي الأمر منكم. The part about أولي الأمر منكم, certainly, of course, this ayah is related. So this ayah right here is related to the previous ayah, certainly. And both would basically tell us, yes, you go back to the resource of what it actually means to judge and rule by what resource in order to get to justice. And of course, it tells you to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet and Ulil Amr. Now, the part about Ulil Amr, I wanted to emphasize that because the word Ulil Amr, certainly it sounds that it is basically speaking about those that were in position of leadership. Yet here there were actually a number of scholars that actually said it wasn't necessarily those that were in a position of leadership, but they actually said it was to go back to the scholars. So it was basically saying to go back to those scholars. Let me just point that one. So let's see. In here it says, الضحاك had said يعني الفقهاء والعلماء في الدين. So when it says ulil amri minkum, this is not talking about, I guess, the leaders or those that were in governance or in office, but this is actually referring to right there the scholars in fiqh. And when you say the word scholars in fiqh, it doesn't mean a person that is specialized in fiqh per se. Sometimes the word al-fuqaha can be more comprehensive, which would basically include the scholars in Islamic studies. Okay, the scholars in Islamic studies. We're not talking about graduates in Islamic studies from Berkeley or Chicago University or Brown University. We're actually talking about the actual scholars that studied Islamic studies through considerable scholars that had the ijazah from other scholars, Muslim scholars, not John and George and all of those. والعلماء في الدين, and basically the scholars. And of course, you could see right there, there's a here, Jabir ibn Abdullah wa Mujahid. So Jabir ibn Abdullah would basically mean this is a Sahabi. They basically said their ulul amr basically refers to Ahl al-Quran wal-ilm. So a lot more comprehensive, and said they're basically the scholars of Quran. Ahl al-Quran can mean the scholars of Quran, and could also mean the scholars that are pious. Okay, so the Muslim scholars, it's not the person. So here, when you say Ahl al-Quran wal-ilm, this is is not talking about necessarily the scholars that have the information, but the scholars that adopt and put into practice. And you could sense that they're basically scholars that are putting the ilm into practice. I also wanted to quote this piece right there, Ibn Khuwaizimandad. And I found it really interesting. And that's why I put it on my Facebook. And look at what he said. وأما طاعة السلطان, quote, فتجب فيما كان لله فيه طاعة ولا تجب فيما كان لله فيه معصية. ولذلك قلنا إن ولاة زماننا لا تجوز طاعتهم ولا معاونتهم ولا تعظيمهم، ويجب الغزو معهم متى غزوا، والحكم من قبلهم، وتولية الإمامة والحسبة. Okay. And let's see. وإن صلوا بنا وإقامة ذلك على وجه الشريعة، وإن صلوا بنا وكانوا فسقة من جهة المعاصي جازت الصلاة معهم، وإن كانوا مبتدعة لم تجوز الصلاة معهم إلا أن يخافوا فيصلى معهم تقية وتعاد الصلاة. Now this quote was rather very interesting to me. What does it mean? And who is this Ibn Khuwaizimandad? Ibn Khuwaizimandad was a scholar from the 4th century Hijrah. He was Maliki that lived in Iraq. And he said, as for obeying, the sultan would not mean a sultan, a guy sitting on wearing a turban with a little gem in the forehead. This is not the sultan. Okay, this is more of some kind of I guess an image to what a sultan looks like. But a sultan is basically referring to any person that is in leadership, whether it's a khalifa or whether it's in a person that is basically in government leadership. And he said it would be obligatory to obey them in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered basically as obligatory. In other words, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to obey them in. But it is not obligatory to obey them in a sin. Well, that's obvious. What else is new? And he said, that is why we had said that the leaders during our time, it is forbidden to obey them or even support them or even glorify them. Now that one was kind of weird. And it would be obligatory to go in battles with them, and of course when we're speaking about whatever they would rule. And basically in that situation, basically al-hisba in governance, let's call it civil governance, in that situation would basically, we would help in participating, probably in Hisba, which is like a police officer. And, a police officer, this is not talking about a National Guard, but this is talking about police officers, because what they would do is Hisba. And all of that, of course, we would basically support them if it is ala wajh sharia, if it basically goes in parallel and equivalence with what sharia rules. Yet if they were to lead in prayer and they were fasaqa, fasaqa actually means they were overtly committing sin, and of course everybody knows that they're sinning, in that situation it would be permissible to pray with them. But if they were innovators, it would not be permissible to pray with them, except if you feared them. You feared that if you were not to pray with them, there were these spies out there, they're going to see you and probably then interrogate you, and you're probably going to go into cell and eventually basically die in the cell for just not praying with them. And he said then you could pray with them taqiyya. Taqiyya basically means you're doing an action not because you believe in it, but because you're afraid that if you would not do it, that you might actually be, of course, then probably persecuted or who knows what. So you're just doing it just really to hide the situation. And he said, what tu'adu salah, and you are to redo the prayer. That one I found it really strange. And of course, there are going to be those that would object and actually say, well, for Ibn Khuwaizm and Dad, you're basically taking about a person. That actually wanted to basically, Hamajelo, he's actually a scholar from Senegal. Okay, a scholar from Senegal. And it's really sad, to be honest. Listen to this. To be honest, I think our community, the Muslim community, and I think that's fair to say, we are unfortunately quite racist in our community, and we really need to fix that. And I had seen that even in Minnesota, unfortunately, in where if we have a scholar that is of color, we may actually disregard their ilm because of being probably of an African descent or an African origin, and then they become these scholars that are not appreciated because of their color, or sometimes because somebody is of probably an American or probably a white person. You would actually see that appreciation completely different in comparison with somebody that is of color. I think we're still living with this mentality of, let's call it, the colonizers had actually instilled within our minds a certain image. And I think we had lived with it and we don't recognize it, that if somebody is of color, then therefore they can't be as educated, they cannot be as given the same type of honor that you would give somebody else. And I had even seen that same thing even when I went to the Gulf countries. If somebody has their Islamic studies degree, believe it or not, this is real. If they would have their Islamic studies degree, and we're not talking about science here, we're talking about Islamic studies degree from an American university like Brown University, Chicago, Princeton, whatever it is, they would actually be granted a position even in teaching Sharia over somebody that might actually have an Islamic studies degree, probably from Malaysia University or probably from an Islamic university from a Muslim country, even if that was Al Azhar. We really have a problem. We really have a problem where, unfortunately, the I would say the imperialist colonizers had really colonized our hearts, where we even lack appreciation to our own scholars, to our own ilm and our own heritage. Anyhow, let's jump from that. And why did I even say that for speaking about Muhammad Jallo? I think in this article, he did an outstanding job in speaking about Ibn Khuwaizm and Dead, and plus, you rarely actually see um, a research that is done in a way where the most of the unfortunately most of the dissertations during our times, when you would see master's thesis and PhD dissertations, most of the times I would say that they are copy paste. Rarely you would see, and I'm talking about Islamic studies here, rarely during our times you would see scholars that are digesting, I'll just use the word digesting, although it's not a very academic word, but digesting the ideas and going and doing thorough research to understand and bring about a final conclusion regarding the study that they do. So, or that they had done basically on that. So what happened was is that Ibn Khuwaizm and Dad, there are all these different controversial opinions regarding him, because you had different scholars that actually did not necessarily say the most beautiful statements regarding Ibn Khuwaizm and Dad. Let's go over it and see what he says. All right. So he basically says, well, Ibn Khuwaizm and Dad, who's the scholar that we were doing, his name is Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Ali ibn Khuwaizm Mendad. So his last name is probably indicating that he, although yes, he was from Iraq, but it probably means that he was probably Kurdish. or probably Turkmeni or something, but definitely not Arabi. Regardless, all right. And of course, he went into saying that there are different 10 ways of how they had said his name. Is it Huwaiza and then Mendad, or how do you actually say this? Because, of course, clearly and obviously his name is not Arabi. So, regardless of the name, but then here we go into the other piece of it. Is this scholar necessarily a scholar of considerable place, or what really is he? Look at this one. This one is probably the most controversial point. Al-Qadi Iyad. Now, mind you, Al-Qadi Iyad is one of the most important figures for the Madhab Maliki. In quote, he said, لم يكن بالجيد النظر ولا بالقوي الفقه وأن عنده شواذا عن مالك واختيارات وتأويلات لم يرجع عليها حذاق المذهب. Now, this is a very dangerous quote. Let's actually go back and see. So, ترتيب المدارك للقاضي عياض. So, this basically is the quote that he quotes from. So, what does he actually say? He said he wasn't doing good scrutiny and good research and was not strong in his research. So, in other words, he wasn't good in deriving the Islamic rulings. And of course, what he means by that, in where he explained what he means by that, that he had shawad on Malik. Shawad on Malik, it doesn't mean that he was going exceptional. This is not talking about going exceptional based on Malik, but in every single madhab has its principles in fiqh. That those principles, they would basically use those principles to derive the different rulings, and they would be considered that goes back according to the paradigms of the madhab, that particular madhab or that particular school. So basically said that he kind of had certain fatawas or certain fiqh rulings that were different than what Malik would actually consider as the paradigm for the Maliki school. And he, of course, he says, and he basically had chosen opinions. And it doesn't mean that his chosen opinions, or at least his preferences, or what he had considered as preponderant, he said it wasn't based off what hudaq al-madhab, like the exceptional and the chosen scholars within that school would basically go back to and consider. Let's say Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he basically quoted that Ibn Abdul Barr, who's actually Maliki, and Ibn Hajar is actually Shafi'i. And he said that, look at this quote. He said Ibn Abdul Barr had basically accused or somehow criticized Ibn Khuwaizim and Dad in his book, of course, without actually wajhu ta'min fih. He didn't really have an explanation or even an acceptable reason to why he would actually do that. And of course, one thing is that this Muhammad Jallo, this Senegalese scholar, had actually went over these quotes, and it was really strange to actually look at some other ones in where wanted to see where he said it, but he basically goes and says, let me see if I can actually control F and actually see and show you what he said. Let's look at this one. Ibn Hazm had actually said that he was sakhif, jahil. And of course, that was something that Ibn Hazm, whenever he disagrees with a scholar, he would actually call him that. What is sakhif? Sakhif means silly. Jahil actually means ignorant. And Ibn Hazm, who's actually my favorite scholar, but yeah, even if he is my favorite scholar, it doesn't mean that we would necessarily accept everything that he says. All right. So he just called him sakhif, silly, jahil, ignorant. So it goes that far. Can scholars actually go that far in describing other scholars? And the reason why I wanted to mention that is that many times during our times, people can be confused when they would hear a scholar speaking about another scholar and they're like, well, I don't know who to listen to. I'm not really sure. This is not new. This is not new that one scholar can criticize another scholar when both are actually scholars. So what I want you to, learn from that is even if you were to hear one scholar speaking of another scholar, something that is probably not appropriate. They're still human beings at the end of the day. If you know another scholar had mentioned that the other scholar, let's say it that way, that they have listened to what they teach, etc., and I would really not be too, what is the word that I could use, but um, too confused and too paranoid about the different scholars. This is common. This is common. And of course, when we're speaking about the scholars during our time, certainly they're not as scholarly as the scholars back then. And this is real. I think it's important to mention that. And here's one thing. So then he goes to scrutinize these words, and he said what he had seen is that when they would actually say such things, he would say that, well, it's because they've been Khuwaizim and dead, or Khuwaizim dead, whatever, there are 10 different ways, that many times it was really because he wasn't necessarily disagreeing or agreeing with the madhab, or at least the madhab Maliki and everything, and that's why they would basically say that, but not necessarily that he didn't have knowledge. Let's see, he says Al-Qurtubi had actually mentioned a couple quotes in where Qurtubi, why Al-Qurtubi? Because Al-Qurtubi himself is actually Maliki madhab. And let's see, there's another scholar, Banani al-Maliki. He basically called him Shaykh al-Islam. Let's see, he actually called him Shaykh al-Islam, and that was actually on Sharh al-Muhalla. And al-Muhalla, of course, is basically for Ibn Hazm, but you could see, although Ibn Hazm, our favorite scholar right there, although he called him Sakhif and Jahil, but you had the scholar that basically had revered Ibn Hazm, where to the point that he actually did a whole explanation and a whole book just to explain al-Muhalla, had still called him Shaykh al-Islam. All right, so let's see, Abu al-Khattab, he basically said in where he basically called him, of course, من علماء الفقه والنظر, that he's one of the scholars of deep fiqh, deep knowledge in Islam, and deep and strong scrutiny in fiqh. So I want you just to look at that, and it's important. I wanted you to actually see that, yeah, even if you were to have all these scholars can sometimes say, these things, it doesn't necessarily prove that one particular scholar is to be disregarded simply because someone else had criticized him in a certain way, or her, of course. Let's see. And Abu al-Walid al-Baji, and of course, he basically says right there, says, well, القاضي اوكي hold on، ممن انتقد علاء بن خويزم ان القاضي عياض نقل عن الباجي انه غير معروف في علماء المالكيه العراقيين. And basically he says, well, Al-Qadi Iyad probably didn't have the knowledge about the scholars of the Maliki scholars from Iraq, because mind you, Al-Qadi Iyad was actually in what it was considered as Morocco, or at least all the way on the other side of the West, basically. Well, on the other side, what we would consider the West at that time. Okay, so I'm just gonna make the story short, and let's see what he basically goes and says. So he basically says that the summary for all this research is that, number one, he lived in the fourth century Hijrah, and he is considered one of the major scholars of the Maliki madhab from those that were in Iraq, and he basically had done a lot of contribution to the Maliki madhab in where other scholars had actually considered, and there were a number of different studies in regards to his study in tafsir and in fiqh and in usul. In fact, there was, let's see this one, let's see, here's one study, and where it was done by Dr. Abdul Aziz Subhi in Al-Qura University, in where he did a dissertation. It seems like it was a PhD, don't know really all his opinions in Usul al-Fiqh. And I was really happy to see Sumaya Sultan. Sumaya Sultan, she basically did a study just on his quotations and his tafsir, which is quite interesting, in the University of Muhammad bin Saud. And there is another study that was done by Abdul Qadir Mahjoubi in Fas, which basically Fas is Fas in Morocco. So you could see it was two in terms of studying his tafsir. So this is just to, summarize this point. And I did share that. Yeah, I did. I was sharing it. Okay. So just wanted to share that point and going back to our tafsir. So basically we were still commenting on the point about ulil amri minkum. Just wanted to point to that particular piece of it. Let me just see right there. The other scholars have actually said ulil amr, basically referring to ulil aql, those that have strong scrutiny. In other words, basically the studies, the different research, etc., to help us. And of course, that does not contradict al-fiqh. All right. So in other words, when you're talking about ulil amr, you're talking about those that are in specialty. Basically, that's what they would, ulil aql would mean, in specialty. All right, which is really interesting. But there was this point that I really wanted to mention, which I know that there's going to be a lot of, hold on, I wanted to quote it. I thought it was extremely important. Hold on, let me see. If you were to differentiate in or have differences of opinions, it would basically go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger. But there was this story. Wanted you to see it. I can't believe that I actually lost it. I would have to find it. Really, I can't believe I lost it. But I will find it, inshallah, at another time, because I can't find it. No, I can't find it. So the story, okay, here we go. I think we're getting there. The story about Umar ibn al-Khattab, basically. About Umar ibn al-Khattab, I can't believe I lost it. About Umar ibn al-Khattab, so the story is this, they basically have this dispute, and then they would go back to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ basically gave his wording on it. The munafiq, on the other hand, he wanted to choose someone else to bribe in order to get another opinion to basically be in his favor. And that's when he basically starts going to someone else, and then finally goes to Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar ibn al-Khattab, according to that narration, basically tells him, so you went to the Prophet ﷺ, you went to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and you still rejected the Prophet ﷺ's opinion. So basically cuts his head off. And of course, going back, and that was really ironic, and it was really rather strange. And then that ayah was actually revealed in basically speaking about, okay, is this it? No, in speaking about that particular story, and that it was in order to bring about that emphasis. But this narration is actually not authentic, is not authentic whatsoever. And there are so many different things in regarding to that narration. I'm so sorry I couldn't find it, but inshallah I will find it next time, even though I actually had it highlighted. But you could see that I totally had lost it. It's totally lost, and I can't find it. But I think it's important for you to see that this is actually not an authentic narration, and that the story in that regards, which many times people think this is it. No, this is oh boy, I can't believe I lost it. That's all right. Inshallah, we'll continue. I'll find it some other time, inshallah. All right. The other piece of it, at least you know that that's not an authentic narration, because you might actually find it in the books of tafsir. And of course, the Orientalists and those that want to attack Islam, they'll want to attack the story and bring it like, look, this person is forced to basically accept the Prophet's rule, and because he didn't, he was basically killed. And of course, now you know that the story is actually not authentic and whatsoever, and that the story is actually fabricated. All right, let's see this one. ألم ترى إلى الذين يزعمون أنهم آمنوا بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك يريدون أن يتحاكموا إلى الطاغوت. We talked about that one. فكيف إذا أصابتهم مصيبة بما قدمت أيديهم. There are some scholars that had actually said that is actually in regards to the munafiqeen when they had actually built the masjid. It's called the Masjid Dirar. So ironically, the munafiqeen wanted to create a division within the ummah. So what they did was actually build a masjid. And it wasn't for the sake of building a masjid, it was really for the sake of creating a division. So what they did is that, oh, here is the quote. Here we go. This is the quote. Whoa, subhanAllah. There you go. We say Durra, I guess. Here we go. This is the quote that I wanted to show you. So here we go. So this munafiq and the story that I just told you earlier, in where Umar ibn Khattab basically right there, ضرب به المنافق حتى برد. So basically he takes the sword and strikes the hypocrite until he became cold, which is a metaphor to mean that he basically had died. All right, let's see. Here, which Shaib al-Arnaud, he said خبر ضعيف. He said this is actually not authentic. And even in the matan in the actual wording, he said this actually requires scrutiny. When we say fi matnihi nazar, it's a way to say that there is something wrong in that quotation. And he said, yes, certainly al-Wahidi had mentioned it in his book Asbab al-Nuzul and al-Baghawi. So just because it was mentioned in a book, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is authentic, just to note. So even if you have it in Asbab al-Nuzul, which basically is a book, it's in one volume. It's not very big, but it's in one volume. And many times it would actually be as an appendix added to Ibn Kathir, or even Tafsir al-Jalalain. All right, it would be the reasons for the revelation. All right, so even if that was mentioned, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's authentic. Al-Baghawi had also mentioned the story, and let's see, so he says that story is da'if. Just wanted to have you know that, and that's not why he was actually called al-Faruq. Al-Faruq was a nickname given to Umar ibn al-Khattab, and according to the story, he was named al-Faruq because he killed that hypocrite who refused the Prophet's rule. You could see right there, he said, and you can go back to Fath al-Bari and actually go to volume number 7, of course, page 44, to go in detail and see that this is actually not authentic. So it's important to note these, because people, is he need DC? Noura, what are you saying?
So that the scholar or the scholar from Sagal,
Who is it dead?
no, the Muhammad whatever you said his name was.
This guy?
No, you mentioned Muhammad somebody.
I mentioned who?
Never mind. I'll ask you later.
Okay.
You this from Senegal?
Senegal? Oh,
Senegal.
Muhammad Jallo.
Sorry.
Yes, Muhammad Jallo. Yeah, what about
Is he here in DC? Because I think I've seen his lectures.
I thought he wasn't in DC. I actually thought he was in Texas.
Because I've seen his lectures at Dar al-Hijra, which is like
I think he's in Texas. I really think he's in Texas.
Allahu Alam. Okay, sorry.
He owns some kind of a
Because at least he's visited here and given lectures.
Yeah, he has actually, let's see. I don't know if this is, no, this isn't him. I don't really,
But he's very good, mashallah.
don't know. This one says Sierra Leone, so I'm not really sure where he lives right now. But yeah, so he just, I guess they just wanted to point out that he's actually from Senegal. Okay, but anyhow, just I guess the most important thing, the scholars, I think within our ummah, I think it's important to recognize one that scholars can sometimes attack other scholars. They might sometimes exaggerate in their attacks, and learn the khair from those that would give khair. And even when other scholars might disagree with them, don't necessarily disregard a scholar simply because another scholar might disagree with him. Learn the khair wherever it may be. All right, let's continue right there. فكيف إذا أصابتهم مصيبة بما قدمت أيديهم. We were actually talking about masjid dirar. Let me talk about masjid dirar for a little bit. Masjid dirar, the munafiqeen, they actually built masjid dirar and wanted the Prophet ﷺ to come over to masjid dirar in order to create a division. So it was really wanting to somehow consider that the Prophet ﷺ is here approving their masjid, and by approving them, they basically would want to create a division within the ummah, who comes in, who doesn't come in. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually ordered that masjid would actually be demolished. Now that's important to keep in mind. Now, what they said, in aradna illa ihsanan wa tawfiqa. We just wanted to do what is good, what brings in a good contribution. And that's the same thing. Many times we could see in the masajid, they're going into divisions and they're creating another masjid because they disagree with the first masjid, and the other masjid would basically create another division. And it's really sad. We could see it's really sad if we actually become an ummah of hypocrites, not an ummah of la ilaha illallah. That's really sad. All right. أولئك الذين يعلم الله ما في قلوبهم فأعرض عنهم وعظهم وقل لهم في أنفسهم قولا بليغا. We went in details about فأعرض عنهم. And of course, فأعرض عنهم here in this context would actually mean فأعرض عنهم, in where the Prophet ﷺ would disregard a lot of what they are doing. And if the Prophet ﷺ had already known who the hypocrites are, and Umar ibn al-Khattab had offered, hey, let's just get rid of them. Umar ibn al-Khattab's way. Let's just get rid of them. But the Prophet ﷺ said one very important thing, and he said, I fear that people would say, Muhammadun yaqtulu ashabah. Muhammad is killing, ﷺ, is killing his own friends. In other words, to tear people away by thinking that even when they join the Muslim community, that they still would not be safe. And this is important to keep in mind in where something called sadd al-dhara'a. Sadd al-dhara'a is an important rule and an important legal maxim in Islam, which basically means to take away all the different justifications. We're talking about the justifications that other people might claim and what leads to wronghood. Okay, so whatever leads to wronghood, we would basically eliminate the wronghood if it leads to major sins. So, for example, seeing and looking at haram things. Why is that haram? Because it leads to committing something major, which is zina. Why is it haram to, for example, sit at a table where there's alcohol? Well, because alcohol, it would be a major sin if you were to drink it. So sitting at a table that serves alcohol or being in a party that serves alcohol would simply be considered a sin because it might lead to tempting you to even try it. So in that situation, anything that leads to haram, it would basically be, if it leads to a major sin, it would be considered as a minor sin. All right, so that would be a general ruling. So here, the Prophet ﷺ, when he said that he fears that it would be said that Muhammad ﷺ is killing his friends, it would be in order to not lead to a bigger harm. All right. And that's why in fiqh, a legal maxim basically says, إذا تعارضت مفسدتان رعي أعظمهما ضررا بارتكاب أخفهما. I'm going to write that down because it's a general legal maxim. إذا تعارضت مفسدتان okay مفسدتان رعي أعظمهما ضررا بارتكاب أخفهما. Okay, so this is for me writing it for you right there. If you had two evil things basically contradicting one another, we would consider the basically the bigger evil, or the one that is more dangerous, even if we are to commit the smaller evil. So we have somebody that needs basically surgery. Okay, and of course, opening an incision, it might get infected, and who knows what might happen. But we would still do that smaller incision, or at least that incision, because we want to make sure that we would remove, for example, the cancer or whatever that is of a deeper harm, because by keeping that bigger harm, it might actually be fatal or probably even damage and create more damage than what an incision that might get infected do. So in that situation, that's the same thing with fiqh, in where sometimes we might actually go and irtikab akhaf al-darar in order to prevent what is considered as a bigger evil. But that's not for you and I to judge. That's basically for scholars to deeply scrutinize the situation and the circumstances and actually say whether this can be something that we can commit in order to prevent the bigger evil. All right, so this is just an idea right there. What I was really hoping to do, but unfortunately we're caught on time, was really go and do the part about al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. So we will do that next week, inshallah, because this is actually really important. Not next week, sorry, tomorrow. Inshallah, we'll do it tomorrow. So in the meantime, hopefully we won't, get caught up on our tafsir, but inshallah we'll be able to at least do a lot with learning our Islam. So whether we are completing tafsir or we're learning things that relate to it, it's important, inshallah, to learn our Islam. And all of this is, inshallah, a way to get us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the meantime, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Where are we? So if you'd like to unmute yourselves, promise myself I don't want to go too much beyond time, because I want to make sure that we're not going too much details. Go ahead, Maxine. Go ahead, my dear.
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question about tayamin. You said there's 3 kinds. I didn't get the first two
Yamin al-laghu. The
names.
first one is yamin al-laghu, and yamin al-laghu would basically mean that the person is not meaning their yamin. So that it's just a verbal thing, it's just a wordly thing, that it's a habit that they would just make and say wallahi, etc. It's just a habit. So yamin al-laghu. Yamin al-laghu. They have this habit in where you would ask them, for example, what they ate, and they're like, oh wallahi, I ate a soup and whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like,
I got the definition. It's just the names.
Okay, it's called yamin al-lahu. The second one is yamin munaqida. The third one is yamin al-ghamus. Write it down. Yamin al-lahu, yamin munaqida, yamin al-ghamus. Yamin
And
al-Ghamus is actually taken from the hadith. تذر الديار بلاقة. It leaves the cities empty. Why does it leave the city empty? Because of something called the qasama, in where when somebody is, let's say, killed, and we're suspicious, we know someone has been killed. We know that there was a crime, and they got 50, I guess, people that they're suspicious of. And then we're going to get these 50 people that we're suspicious of, and we do our investigation, but then at the end, after investigation, we don't actually come across one particular person. So we would make them do qasama. We would make them make a yamin. Okay. And if, let's say, this person made the oath and was a liar about an oath or lying about an oath, in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ says and mentions that it would leave a whole city. So even if this person basically lived in a particular city, not all the people will be held accountable, but this person, even if we talked about these 50 people and a certain group of people had actually committed the crime and were lying about it, the whole city, according to this hadith, would actually be punished. The whole city would be punished if they're basically, of course, living in this city, for lying and making a yamin through a lie, or making an oath and lying about it. So in that situation, when we're talking about al-yamin, yes, it will come back to that person. Yamin would be relating to people's rights. It will come back to that person, whether it basically makes their house get burnt down or get cancer or something, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold them accountable and will retaliate for this yamin in life, in their life, in this dunya, for what lie that they had made and put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their defense and as their witness and lying about it. So they really have to take it seriously.
And the one that that you have to feed or give
So
clothes
that would
to
be
10 people, that
this isn't relating to people's rights. So
this
Yameen Munaqada is not related to people's rights. Yameen Munaqada is something between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just, you made the Yameen, Wallahi, Wallahi, I'm going to, for example, cook you fish tonight. Okay. Well, I'm going to cook you fish tonight. Okay. You just made that Yameen. And then they tell you, but you promised to make us fish tonight. You didn't do it. That's a Yamin Munaqada. You really promised, you really meant it. Then in that situation.
So it's for Yamin al-Khamus that you have to compensate if you don't.
Yamin al-Munaqada is what you have to compensate, feeding 10 or feeding 10 or clothing 10. But Yamin al-Ghamus, there's no way but go to the actual person.
Okay.
And ask them to forgive you for it, and actually announce that you had lied about this.
Okay.
There's no
I
way.
actually went through that in real life.
Wallahi, Noura, don't tell us your sin, Noura Allah yahdiki.
No, not no.
Oh, you didn't
Like
do it?
back in the day, someone had like accused me of something, and then I don't know if you have to be in front of a judge, but they did that, and subhanallah, like, anyway.
I have a really disgusting story to say. I know who would say I have a disgusting story to say. My sister's mother-in-law, when she was a young girl, she basically, I guess, some lady in the neighborhood went into some dispute with my sister's mother-in-law's mom. Okay. And what she did, she basically, goes to my sister's mother-in-law, who was at the time a young girl, and I guess wanted to somehow attack the mother. So she basically found the girl, her daughter, as the easiest target and literally chops the girl's hand off. Literally chops the girl's hand
Oh
off.
my God.
This is real. She chops her hand, and she really didn't have a hand up to the wrist. And it wasn't until later, subhanAllah, and it wasn't until later, many years later, that woman, her son was actually working in construction. It was like a stone cutter, and these stone cutters, they would have like a huge, it's kind of like a huge funnel, and they would have these huge rocks that would start making, of course, these rocks, it was for building and stuff, and it would chop them up into making them small pebbles for building reasons. But then that woman's son eventually falls inside this stone thing, cutting thing. It's really strange how they didn't actually, how they would have it open like that, and actually falls inside of this and dies. It's so scary. I know it's so disgusting. I mean, it just gives me the shivers and the goosebumps to actually think of it. And it's subhanAllah, it's really scary. It's really scary. But I know
What
someone would say,
what does the word ghamus mean?
so ghamus means lying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair.
I mean, ghamus, and where they're lying about it. They're lying about it. They're making up a whole story and all of that, and they're lying about it. So it's basically a lied about Yamin. You're lying about something. Any other questions? No questions? All right, so this is it. Inshallah, we will continue. We will continue tomorrow, and hopefully we'll stick to the topic. And inshallah, we'll
I have,
continue.
I have a little question.
Go
At
ahead.
first, in the beginning of the meeting, you said do not wrong them even if they wronged you.
Right,
So, but then after you went on to say like
right.
because there's different opinions, you can if like if somebody does something to you, you're allowed to go to
So
get justice or
basically,
something.
if you're capable of getting justice,
Mm-hmm.
that situation, seek the means to get justice. But, okay, let me explain that one. So, seek the means to get justice, but that doesn't mean that I guess, relate it to Sifat al-Munafiqeen, إذا خاصم فجر. If you know that person, let's say, took something that is yours, then in that situation, it is fair to retaliate and actually take whatever belongs to you. All right. Yet, of course, this would actually be really, I would say, a very sensitive thing to do, because it depends what we're talking about. Because if we're going to consider and give a justification that every single time you're wrong, that you're going to take the law and going to take your rights in your own hands, in that way, we're actually going to let the people then rule for themselves and start to probably attack other people and claim that, well, I have the right to retaliate, I have the right to take the law in my hands. And then what we're going to see is really nothing but chaos in our society. So in that situation, it depends on how big, one, the consequence, the matter is. So if, for example, you have a matter and you wanted to basically get your rights, I would always recommend, don't do it in your own hands, but actually get the appropriate measurement to do it. And that is through, I guess, the people that are specialized to do this, or at least to get to get people that are considered of, of I guess, a position within the society, or perhaps maybe a legal process in order to help you get your justice. Because if you're going to get justice in your hands, you're going to get yourself probably in a worse trouble, and even worse than the situation that you are probably in. All right, you might get probably wanting to take your phone back, but the person, of course, that transgressed the limit to probably steal your phone might have basically transgressed so many limits, and eventually might actually have gotten used to transgressing the limits, that they're willing to go and probably kill or even harm you in different ways. And we've seen that in prisons a lot of times. It's a we've seen that in prisons a lot of times, where somebody, they would transgress the limit. It starts with probably maybe stealing a phone, and then later on it becomes stealing hundreds of dollars, and later on it becomes stealing and becoming professional in stealing. And then later on, hey, you learn how to transgress the limit of people's properties. You'll then learn how to transgress the limit of people's lives, and probably transgress the limit of what brings in people's, of course, what brings in money, what brings in a lot of these transgressions would basically be probably even intoxications, and the list goes on and on. And then you find yourself hooked and wired into all these transgressions without you recognizing. And that's what we see all the time in prison. It doesn't stay within one area. It continues. It will continue to actually being into one transgression after another, until this person is all wired up in all these transgressions, in harming their deen, harming people's lives, harming people's even probably in intoxications, probably in zina, probably in property, and all these different things. And you're like, okay, where do we start with this person? And that's why if you want to start in, bring in chaplaincy, and or at least let's call it religious and spiritual therapy, the first thing you want to get them to is really start with the deen, is really connect them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with tawheed, strengthen that part, and then go into, I guess, strengthening their part about at least preserving the nafs, and then probably working on the intoxications, probably helping them go through a facility. Then you're going to go one after another. But it would be impossible for you to tell them, stop zina, stop your drinking, stop your drugs, stop this, and stop watching all the, there's no way that you can
So
actually.
that's basically therapy according
It's
to
therapy.
Usul al-Fiqh.
Oh, absolutely. That's why we really need experts, and to really have something like facilities, in facilities that would help those, that had been living this kind of lifestyle, in where we need specialists in fiqh to train, in specialists in fiqh, and specialists even in Sufism, I would say, really in training people how to grow in their deen, and little by little, and doing it in the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the same time, we definitely need experts in those areas. And although the hadith is not authentic, but khiyarukum fil jahiliyyah, khiyarukum fil Islam, although it's not authentic.
That's not authentic?
It's not authentic. I know.
Oh my God.
I know. It's like, it sounds so deep, right?
Sounds so cool.
That's
Yeah.
so deep. Let me translate what that means. What that means is that the best of you during their Jahiliyyah are actually the best of you during their Islam, which would basically mean, those that used to be gains late before in their history, all right, when they had become Muslim, were actually the best to be at it. It's actually not authentic. I know it sounds like, hey,
yeah, I see what you mean.
You see what I mean? It's actually not authentic. As a matter of fact, it really contradicts, that other hadith where it actually says, and where he was talking about, out of the seven that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would shade, one of them, he says, a young man, basically even during their youth, they were memorizing Quran, they were connected to the masjid, they were connected to talab al-ilm, and of course, you cannot whatsoever consider that as equal to somebody that grew up most of their life probably in games and watching movies, or probably just doing the wrong thing. You can't consider those are actually nobler, if that's even a word in English, but even more noble. I don't know if nobler is even a word, but at a higher level of nobility, let's say it that way. All right, than the people that were actually growing up all their life in seeking ilm, in living in, I guess, within the masjid, between the masajid, in between talab al-ilm. But anyhow, part of it is actually, containing some, I would say, insight in where those that lived that kind of lifestyle are capable of I would say leading others to guidance. And we're talking about these kind of people, and that's why the best in chaplaincy are really the ones that had a history of being in prisons and a history of living this lifestyle, and did an outstanding job later on in, I guess, converting to Islam and learning Islam, and then probably guiding others to Islam, because they know all the different methods that are used to misguide others. And later on, when they hold on to their Islam, they actually become the strongest. They become the strongest in, I guess, leading others to the path of away from all the misguidance. And there are a number of different names. And I mean, in prisons, we had seen, and of course, these people, especially the guy side, the girl side is completely different, but the guy side in prisons is completely different, where these guys are literally having nothing to do but work out, and work out. So these guys, we're not talking about six pack here. We're talking about real big guys. They could be real big guys that have really been working out for hours and hours, and they have nothing to do but work out. And these people are tough. And in prisons, of course, they work because, again, most of them are actually gains. They do actually find, and of course, in converting to Islam as a way to join a clan or join a group of people to protect you. So these guys that are, now converted to Islam, but it's really sad. Many of them are really, I would say, absorbed into a lot of the Islamic or the Muslim, I would say, organizations. And for example, I remember, having conversations with some of them, and they couldn't even say the organization that they belong to, right? And they said it was Salafi. So it was like, dealing with it like it was some kind of salami sandwich. Like, they couldn't even say the name Salafi. They even said Salafi. You're like, oh, great. You can't even see the name right. Do you really know what this stands for? So it's really sad to get absorbed into all these labelings of organizations rather than really learning Islam. If they couldn't even say the name right, you understand what I'm saying? We've got a problem if we're going into all these divisions, calling this as Salafi instead of Salafi. Couldn't even say the name right. When I heard the word Salafi, I'm like, what? What is that? Why don't we do some kind of salami sandwich or something like that? And it's like, anyhow, but if they're absorbed into these controversial debates, instead of learning their Islam, instead of learning the tafsir, Quran, the simple things about how to perform their salah, right, their tahara, etc., and not get into these conversations that really just, I would say, distract you from what really matters. Allah understand. So this is just one side. So I don't know how I got hooked into this, but anyhow, so we'll continue, inshallah. Maxine, you want to say something else, dear?
So basically, I just wanted to know, is it better to not retaliate, or like if you say just whatever, you wrong me, but I won't wrong you, and I'll leave it to Allah, and that's it. You know?
So that is definitely better because this is basically al-afu. This is al-afu. This is basically to forgive. All right. So this is actually better. But in situations where sometimes you are wronged, is it okay for me to at least put a stop to you wronging me? Certainly, put a stop to
Or others.
or others, absolutely. Or others when they're wronging you. So yes, put a stop to it, but you have to be wise in how you put a stop to it, and definitely, be careful in exceeding the limits. I guess that's the most important part. Be careful in exceeding the limits, because in exceeding the limits without you recognizing, you could actually be going into the other boundary of hadith, which basically says, in regards to the munafiqeen and their description, إِذَا خَاصَمَ فَجَرَ. Whenever they would be in dispute with somebody, they would basically go into fujur. So fujur would basically be taking away all the Muslim rights, in where the person might actually attack somebody's life, might actually attack their privacy, reveal their privacies, or even go beyond into wanting to take only their rights. They might actually go beyond in attacking these people and transgressing the limits. Okay, that's إذا خاصم فجر. And we've seen that all the time. We've seen that all the time, in where they will disagree with somebody, and then they'll basically, abuse that they're probably in need of papers, and they'll go and probably go and tell maybe the FBI, or probably tell about them, maybe the immigration or whatever it is, just to harm them. And I've seen that all the time, where somebody is probably in need of government assistance, but they'll actually go and tell about them, certain things, just so that they would be deported, etc. That in that situation, that's either khasam al-fajr, not because you disagree with somebody, not because you probably had some kind of a problem between you and your husband, or whatever it is. I'm going to here use all those different means to completely burn them out, not give them means to survival in any way, and all the list goes on and on. That's fujur. That's fujur. And the best thing, let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inna Allah yadafa an ladina amanu, let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deal with them, take your own rights, and get your what belongs to you, and the rest, leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I see that all the time, where women sometimes, because she's probably wronged by her ex or her husband or whatever it is, she's going to be using each and every single mean to harm that person, and it's really scary. Shaitan will be there to basically take you on the other side and tell you that it is justified by the religion, and it's basically mu'amala bil-mithil, and that's really scary. So be careful with that one.
Or sometimes it's like the contrary. She doesn't wanna make trouble, and she doesn't do anything to get her rights, and then she gets abused.
So, stopping the abuse is different than actually, than actually going and taking the law in your own hands. You understand me? And in that situation, that's completely different. So stopping the abuse, there are ways to stop the abuse. If, hey, you're being abused by a husband, etc., well, there are ways. One, divorce. There are different ways to actually do it, to stop the abuse. But to transgress the limit under the pretense that I'm trying to stop the abuse is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Mia was more talking about the Islamic rights, not the the laws of the governments here or whatever that.
Well, most of the laws, most of the rights in the secular system are actually, believe it or not, they're similar to Islam. They are similar to Islam, most of the rights. I would probably not be exaggerating by saying perhaps 90% of the legal justice system, let's say the way the legal system is actually going in accordance with Islam. I would say probably 90% of it is actually is going with in accordance to Islam in protecting people's property, protecting people's rights, etc. So yes, there are certain things, but most of it is actually really in the same is in Islam, or at least in different different fiqh or in different schools. And in those situations, maybe the situations that we tend to sometimes emphasize, maybe the 10%, but the secular, I'm talking about the system in ruling, okay? I'm not talking about the actual big thing, where yes, they would not necessarily go back to the Quran and Sunnah, etc. But the actual justice system, a lot of it is actually similar to Islam. A lot of it. You will be so surprised to actually see that it has a lot that traces back to Madhab Maliki and Madhab Hanafi in particular.
Except for the Yamin Ghumus.
Yamin al-Ghamus. So
yeah.
Yamin al-Ghamus is even Yamin, they'll make you swear on the Bible, the Quran, whatever you believe in.
But there's no punishment. Are they going to punish you if you?
There is. There is to make. There is by law. There is. If you were to actually swear, it's a form of fraud.
Oh, okay.
There is. It's a form of fraud, and fraud, it can go up to 3 years in prison, and even 15. It depends on the case. Oh yeah, no, they take fraud really seriously depending on the case. And sometimes you would, and sometimes it depends on how far the case had gone. Sometimes with and without parole, so it depends on the case, but it depends on how far the case had gone. And no, they take it seriously, not true. And even when we're talking about, to be honest, I think the secular governance right now in family law, not the part about, I guess, the part about how much of and what is a fair distribution in terms of wealth from the property, the husband's property, etc., and the wife's property, all of that. I think that piece of it, there's definitely the feminist influence there, but in general, I think the legal in the Islamic courts, they have a lot to learn from the secular courts, and where they had actually, how far they went in making sure that we're talking about children's rights being in place, having specialists being involved, whether it's psychologists or even child protection services, or whether we're speaking about the guardian ad litem, all these areas. I think they had really done an outstanding job. And I think, if we compare that to the books in fiqh, of course, were really in the beginning in bringing about the foundation of family law. But I think they had taken it from, the Islamic family law, and then they had added a lot to make sure that children's rights are really protected, and they will really do an outstanding scrutiny and investigation to make sure that those that are vulnerable are actually supported, and those that are vulnerable, that their rights are supported by an area that is specialized. I think they had done an outstanding job, to be honest. And even when we're speaking about investigations, using autopsy, using science, using all these different medical resources have definitely advanced the governing system by far, by far. And, you know, I participated in so many cases where the judge will say, I want to go right now and actually do a drug test, or I want to go right now downstairs and actually do a paternity test, or whatever it is. Right now, do a blood test for this, or, you know, right now. And, you know, they would actually have a lab downstairs. And it's really hard to, you know, anticipate what sometimes the judge might actually say and expect from you, or even and even the system in where to see, you know, how much money you're spending, and even the court has access to your financial or the transactions and all the different things that you're doing. So the lawyers will, through your social security number, they're capable of knowing what medications you were prescribed, what doctors you had seen, your psychological situation, your what laws you had transgressed, how many times you were caught, a DWI or whatever it is. All these different things do actually come in support. So it's a lot harder to, I guess, escape these documentations during our time, because everything is basically electronically recorded. So even when you're talking about cameras, you're talking about doctor's appointments, you're talking about banking statements, all these different things, they're a lot harder to escape than before. And those things actually come in favor of the court system, because the court system can use this information to basically try to get to an unbiased rule, whether we're talking about a family dispute or whether we're talking about disputes in general. And of course, sometimes it can be tricky. It can be tricky in how you might actually create a narrative. But still, they definitely come as helpful resources to rule on different matters. And definitely when we're talking about the secular system right now, it definitely is I would say, a lot more advanced than the fiqh system that was before. And if we are to get a khilafah, I would definitely be one of those people that would say, hey, we really need experts in law, experts in the justice system that is in the West, to, you know, these specialists to come in and really train our fuqaha and really bring in the resources and annex them to our Islamic courts, because the Islamic courts are very, I would say, primitive in their style, and they really need to be updated. We're talking about missing out probably 700 or 800 years of advancement. 800 years of advancement, and we're talking about just the last probably 40 years. We had an advancement like never before in history, whether we're talking about the DNA, whether we're talking about medical testing, all of that. The last 40 years had actually been nothing but a whole revolution in bringing in a contribution to how we do investigations. Just the last 40 years, never mind the rest of the 760 years. It was a huge revolution in cameras, in medicine, in autopsy, and how they would, you know, autopsy is a big deal. It is a big deal. And of course, you're talking about people's rights here. So yeah, we've got a lot to work on to bring in a contribution to fiqh as well. So this is it for today. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow.
Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyyakum.
Alhamdulillah. I love this class.
Alhamdulillah. And we love you too, Noura. We love you for the